So as I mentioned in my last video, which I don't know if I'm going to post or not, I was up all 2 nights ago without any sleep. I was sort of in a weird meditative state, and I was, at the end of it, I came out thinking that I should do videos every day. However, I have so small of a viewership, I don't know if I'm going to bother, but Tony, who said he's been watching every video of mine and really finds it fascinating. So at least one person finds it interesting, and so maybe I shall. Either way, I find it very good in a contemplative sense to go through with these anyways, so it has been sort of beneficial to me on that front, because the only other person I've found easily to talk to about such matters has been Kurt Ara. So what I've been working with lately, and this is a whole different map in many regards, but I think it fits better with many of the more traditional systems. It has the complexity of fractals and the subtlety with it therefrom. And I think it's just easier to understand than the system that I've been working on because of that, because of the sense that it maps on fairly well to the chakra system. So what I've been looking at, and it fits fairly well with spiral dynamics and a few other systems, although it adds some nuances, of course, or I'm trying to anyways. I'm working with a 6-on-6 system. So 1's at the root, 2's at the navel, 3's at the sacral center, 4 at the heart, 5 at the throat, and 6 at the head, at the crown. I'm not using 7. I'm kind of suggesting that there is transfer points in a certain sense, as well as the heart seems in a certain way very central, as well as the sacral. It's very interesting. In spiral dynamics, the core, the center two, that is in first tier, red and blue, have the most sort of potency, the most energy involved in them. The higher ends of the spectrum in the development in the first tier tend off to kind of go overly heady, and then the lower two chakras, that is beige and purple, don't have enough head. In that sense, there's kind of a bringing up to understand the system in certain regards. So in this system, I'm doing a 6-on-6 pattern where the first chakra is all of evolution, broadly speaking, to kind of reptiles, and so that fight or flight instinct, that survival mechanism, etc. It's a fractal too, so I'm arguing that there is sort of 6 stages within that, but that's the kind of primary focus is survival and kind of rooting, grounding for the self, for the I. And the second chakra is essentially about sexual emotional energies, about, in a certain sense, care for other, involved in dreaming. So as we move up this, I'm arguing that new states come online in the tiers. These are different tiers, so in that sense these are coming online, and the degree to which the being maintains awareness through the states is the kind of potency of their witnessing capacities, or something like that. So the second chakra would be primarily sexual emotional stuff, astral and or subtle kind of stuff. The third one would be where humans have gravitated towards in the last 100,000 years, namely power issues in many regards. This, the sacral center is sort of power oriented. So although indeed we move through all of these, this is the fractal nature of it. Humans have access to all of these, where the first two are sort of transcended and included. That is to say, we really don't have to do any work to get access to the first two, whereas a mammal does have to work to really be within its emotional self. We kind of, although we do develop through it, it's almost a given that we're going to have that, at least. When we get into the mental stuff, the individual power stuff, which is mental, that is to say, I recognize myself in relation to the world, then there is some work that has to be done for the individual, because our physiological stuff isn't developed past that, and so in that regard, we have to get the culture, we have to download the culture to really make sense of that. So that's up to 3, and we have therefore access to 3 major states of consciousness, We have access to the first chakra state, which is essentially gross awareness, maybe into hypnagogic, which reptiles seem to have. That is to say, it's when they sleep, it's kind of maybe little colors, but it's not any sort of active visioning. Whereas when you get into mammals, they not only have access to the now, which reptiles and all beings before that, but they seem to have access to the past to some degree, which allows them to be emotional. The reptilian brainstem is the physiological correlate to the reptiles, and then the limbic system is, I think, the correlate to the emotionality of the mammals and the ability to be in the dream state, roughly speaking. Humans in the third center have access to those two, and the dream state is deep dreamless state. And so, I think that parallels roughly like the Zen practice, where you maintain witnessing into the causal witness in deep dreamless sleep. Roughly parallels it. It's not maybe exactly the same. The bardo state would be going through the emotional stuff that Tibetans talk about when you die, arguably. And I would say roughly part of the reason why we have very little access to our dreams is due to black magicians on this planet. That's my opinion. Take it or leave it, but that's part of it. I don't think you're necessarily going to have it, but I think that a lot of that has to do with that. And then the fourth center, I believe, is more associated with care, compassion, connecting, and the second tier in spiral dynamics, which would be the fourth tier in this system. That is to say, because those three up to them all had fractals of 6 in it, which are parallel of all of these systems, this one too will have that. And that's, again, suggested in spiral dynamics, with the first two being survivalist, which is a reintegration of the first chakra. Purple, which is turquoise in the second tier, is a reintegration of the emotional center, which means that there is a new kind of coming online of magician-like powers that sort of, and I would argue more of a reaccessing of the dream state, because it's kind of hooked into the dream state. So I think that yellow would be more sort of nature mystical oriented. The nature mystic kind of comes online in a fairly proper sense with yellow, and then with turquoise you get more of the dream capacities, and then with coral you'll get more of the witnessing capacities. Deep dreamless sleep in relation to this fourth center, which is more purposeful, purpose-driven. Closest reflection in our understanding would be something like blue. It has this kind of spiritual quality to it, but it's not bound to individual absolutism. Rather, it's open and pluralistically free to experience the multivarious the branching philosophies that can hook them in. So, coral would be 3, which is mind-centered in a certain way, individual mind-centered, but focused within the heart in a certain regard. And then when you get into turquoise, indigo proper, then a new sort of mind starts to really come online. That I'm calling it the intermind, even though I don't believe I have really proper access to indigo. But I think it's going to be something like that. I think I have had some fleeting glimpses, maybe, of what that might look like. Maybe. But it would be more intermind connected, where your focus is actually quite altruistic, if it's healthy, if it's developed in a fairly sophisticated way. What happens with these two, I really kind of think that Plato was bringing a lot of this center down to his third sacral center, really clearly bringing this stuff down, which allowed him to kind of have the archetypal wisdom. This seems to be very archetypal from every kind of glimpse that I've had of it. And Terence McKenna talks about the gnomes that can speak things into existence, the creation, which fits with the chakras, but when that's going to be a really late developmental stage, and then same with that one. These two are sort of the core of existence in a certain regard. And so in the transition between 3 to 4, which we're at, which I think is happening December 21st, 2012, arguably, I'm still open to certainly being wrong on that. That's a pretty big statement to make.